Okay, welcome to Atlanta for the start of the league here. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined by Thomas Dimitroff. This is the SumerSports show. This is our studio in Atlanta for right now. We're really excited for all of you that have come and joined us here. There's already people talking in the chat already. Thomas, it's been a crazy few days in the NFL. And I'm just excited to sort of close out this tampering period with you.
Look, I want everyone to know, not only are you a PhD in math, but you're also the IT guy. And what's that line? Chief cook and bottle washer? Like you do it all?
It was crazy. Now, we got to shout some people out. We Tyler Sobchak, who still at PFF, was with me when I was there. And then Matt Sopsky, who helped us out when we were at the Super Bowl. Big help here. But yeah, if we have any technical difficulties, we can obviously trust the people in the chat to help us out here. But I'm so excited for what we have in store here. We have to talk about we're going to be on here for 2 hours. We're going to go 1 hour until the league year starts, and then 1 hour basically after the league year starts, so we can get all of the official signings underway. But we have to talk about something that hasn't become official yet. Aaron Rodgers has expressed on the Pat McAfee show, look, our goal as a podcast is to one day be the place where a disgruntled quarterback tells that he wants to go to a team. But for now, it's a Pat McAfee show. He says that his intention is to play for the Jets, Thomas. We talked about this a little bit on both shows. Like, how do you navigate this situation if you're a general manager on both sides? If you're on the Green Bay side, of course, with Brian Gutekunst, but also if you are on the Packers or the Jets side, with Joe Douglas.
Well, we've talked about the general manager situation at the Packers. When you're talking about Gutekunst, that's been on his mind. This situation has been on his mind for quite a while. It's tough. They also have a head coach that came in, and part of his intelligence, I'm talking about Matt LaFleur, was riding the coattails, and I say that respectfully, but riding the coattails of one of the very best quarterbacks to ever be out there. So this is an interestingly complicated situation in Green Bay. We'll get back to that. I do want to jump over, however, to Joe Douglas as a general manager, of the Jets. And it was asked of me earlier on in an interview today, how would you deal with that? Is that a really difficult thing as a general manager to have someone dictate hiring this guy and sign this guy and this guy because that's what we need to get done? And what I would say, if you're in a spot as a general manager and you want to do what's best for the organization is getting one of the very best quarterbacks to ever play the game in your organization, that's the number one thing to consider. How you do that, I think it's really important to start looking at the probability of something going well, but as well the probability of something going awry. Think about that. And the reason I say that, let's talk analytics.
Yeah.
What is the probability of bringing Aaron Rodgers in there with all of these requests? And if you give in to the requests as a general manager, does that just open up Pandora's box and all of a sudden Aaron Rodgers is going to be dictating everything for the New York Jets going forward?
Yeah, we talked about this lastly. You sort of have to take a pre-mortem of all this. Like, what happens if you sign him and he's a disaster? He's, Russell Wilson proportions last year. Brett Favre kind of had both sides where he was really good for Minnesota. He was okay for the Jets, really good for Minnesota for 1 year, terrible the next. Got Brad Childers fired. But there's obviously the Matthew Stafford thing where Matthew Stafford takes Les Snead and the Rams to a Super Bowl. They win it. And then everything, of course, preceding that is worth it. You look at history, right? You look at the precedent set. When Tom Brady joined the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2020, the previous year in 2019, a lot of similarities, a wide receiving core in New England that was decimated by injuries. Gronk had left, New England to retire that year. Edelman had been coming back from an injury. They didn't really have a great receiving core. Tom Brady had basically his worst year for about 6 or 7 years. He goes to Tampa Bay. He's fantastic, really, and it ultimately gets them to a Super Bowl. So we've seen this happen before. The probability that the Jets will win the Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers is non-zero. Back out that a little bit though and say, okay, but can you compete with Aaron Rodgers? Like, I look at this and I say, like, what if you went with a Derek Carr? What if you went with a Jimmy Garoppolo? What if you went with a Kirk Cousins? One of the other options that was available to them, and you're not competing for a Super Bowl. You look at the AFC playoff quarterbacks. It's Lawrence. It's Herbert. It's Josh Allen. It's Joe Burrow. It's Patrick Mahomes. And so when you look at, and it was Tua as a top 10 pick. Of course, he didn't play in the playoffs. You look at that conference, and I understand what Joe Douglas is doing here by courting Aaron Rodgers, because you need that sort of elite Hall of Fame caliber, super toolsy quarterback to even compete in that conference.
So you're exactly right. General managers of the olden days would look at it and they'd be pulling their hair out, right? Any indication of a player taking control of an organization. This is a newer generation of general manager. I mean, I get it. There were things that we did over the last, 12 years or 13 years that the old school general manager wouldn't do. And there are, and we all know if you win, if Joe Douglas wins, Joe and co, I mean, then everything is great.
Yep.
But if things start to go awry, what if, Aaron maybe has an injury or he's just not operating that well, all of a sudden all darts start throwing towards Joe Douglas on an ultimate decision that he and a head coach make that isn't easy. Again, I am all for what Joe's doing here. Now, I have to be careful about the nuance of it, but in today's not for long league, I know you guys get sick and tired of me hearing that from me, but it is the way it is. Right. They have to make a very, very strong move in New York. I don't think they can go for mediocre. They can't go for the 5 quarterback. They have to go for the 8 quarterback. And I believe, I haven't heard you say this. I really believe Aaron still definitely has gas in the tank and he can play at an extremely high level.
He had his moments, right? He's a guy who over the last decade or so has had his moments of really not poor play, but mediocre play that has been followed up by really good play, right? So you think about, obviously 2010, he won a Super Bowl. 2011, he was the MVP of the league. 2012, 2013, a little bit down. 2014 is MVP. 2015, you look at those statistics, they're not great, right? 2016, halfway through the season, you're looking at a guy who had regressed significantly, and then he turns it on in the back half of 2016. The only thing that could stop Aaron Rodgers in 2016 was your Falcons, right? He came in that was the hottest quarterback in the league, not named Matt Ryan, comes in there, and even then, he gave you guys somewhat of a game. You guys were blowtorching that entire conference. And then again, down year in 17, 18, 19, wins 2 MVPs. So I think that if I would say that Aaron Rodgers is going to have to be a guy that has to have a prolonged, downfall before I ever say he's lost it, right? Before I ever say something like he can't play anymore, just because we've seen him have ebbs and flows between being kind of average and being amazing. And who's to say that he doesn't have one more amazing run in him? He's older, but he's not that old.
So we have not talked about this. He's now potentially, the irony of this, going to the New York Jets. And oh, by the way, who is the offensive coordinator there?
Nathaniel Hackett, right?
Think about that. The irony that didn't happen, which evidently George Payton and the Broncos thought that was going to happen way back, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the acquisition situation. Didn't happen. They end up doing a huge deal with Russell Wilson. But let's talk about that a little bit. Aaron Rodgers reuniting. They both obviously have a great deal of respect for each other. So when you're Aaron Rodgers at this point in his career, he doesn't look at this as high maintenance. He looks on this as kind of playing his own element of general manager. I'm going to tell you guys in the NFL what you need to get done to maximize your talents in New York and be a potential Super Bowl winner.
You look at other sports, right? Like you look at the Miami Heat with Spoelstra. Like I think everybody believes he's a great coach now, but back when LeBron James was there and it was Chris Bosh and it was Dwayne Wade, it's like, is he just a passenger in his own? Mm-hmm. I always say, I think about guys who, quarterbacks like Carr, like Cousins, Tannehill, are they passengers in their own football life? Are they bystanders in their own football life? Aaron Rodgers, for better or worse, is the whole car when it comes to his football life. He's not just driving that thing or riding in it. And, and that's something where, I want to bring it back to you because you obviously drafted a quarterback he may make the Hall of Fame. And at some level, you know that like a lot of your success was due to the fact that he had success. When you're a general manager, how do you handle the fact that there is just that one variable that is probably more important than the head coach, and in some ways, very, very tethered to what your success is? Because that's really where it is. Like, good on Douglas for looking at the situation and saying, I need this quarterback to have success. He drafted, look, the guy drafted the offensive player of the year rookie last year and the defensive rookie of the year last year, and they win 7 games, right? It's no more clear that you need a quarterback than the Jets, right? Because they've done so well in selecting talent recently, and it's just not going to come together unless you get that elite guy. So good on him for sort of allowing, giving away, ceding some, authority, because it's necessary to win.
Good on him, and good on the Johnson family for sticking by a group. Look, Joe Douglas, again, I want everyone to know he is a really good football man with a really good eye. He's been around it a long time. He, as you all know, he comes from an organization like Baltimore and Philly with Howie, but with Ozzie Newsome and Eric DaCosta. He knows how to build football teams. But again, that element of picking your quarterback and everything falling into place with your quarterback is a really, really big deal in this league. You know that. And your owner could easily sort of say, I'm out, because
you failed once, or
right.
The Zach Wilson thing doesn't work. That's your one shot. Good on the ownership for looking at other Douglas things. Even getting Robert Saleh in the mix as a head coach, having good culture there. I think that they're at least going to give him a chance to fail with the quarterback, a good quarterback. And I guess the question becomes, and maybe you asked me this, I wanted to see what your opinion is. You've always had on this show, and every time I've talked to you privately, a huge opinion of Aaron Rodgers, right? And this is the guy who, in your time as the general manager of the Falcons, you've won playoff games against him, you've lost playoff games against him, you've had good games against him, bad games against him. Like, you believe that he's one of the best of all time. Do you still think that he could compete? If you get a game with Mahomes against Rodgers, you get a game with Lawrence against Rodgers. If you're the Jets, are you a favorite in that game, or are you still behind the 8 ball? Because I think that would be the frustrating thing if you're the Jets. If you're the Jets and you get into games with Josh Allen and Buffalo, are you going to win some of those games?
I believe so. I look at Aaron Rodgers, and yes, there were things that went awry this year, and I feel like his mind was in different places. There's nothing worse than being in a situation where you're not really happy for any of us on both sides, right? It could be GM side, head coaching side, quarterback side. My feeling of when I watch him and I still see him move around, I think, short of the really good athletes out there, I still believe he is a good operational athlete, on top of the fact that his awareness and his abilities are still top notch. Of course, people are arguing, and there are times he has his ups and downs, but he recovers. He's got great awareness in my mind. He is a really smart football player. Again, there are people out there that don't like his personality, and the cheeseheads out there, you hear some of them complain. I could be walking around town in Atlanta, and by the way, there are a lot of cheeseheads in Atlanta, and they're like, the first thing they want is they want to move on. And I say to them often, I'm like, skill wise, really be careful what you're looking or what you're asking for, and what you're praying for in your replacement is sitting in the wings in Green Bay. And I don't want to take a shot at Jordan, but you don't know what he is yet as a leader, you just don't know. And what the Jets are about ready to get is a guy who has everything you're looking for from a quarterback standpoint. You hope, the only thing that we don't know is you hope that his focus, once he gets to New York City, it's going to be fully on what it needs to be on. And all of the banter about his dark journeys and,
the guy's very clearly somebody who thinks deeply about things. He might I don't agree with him on everything, but I think it's one of those where he's certainly somebody who the naysayers would say, just shut up and play. But I think whether you agree with him or not about stuff, he's earned the right to be his own person. He's earned the right to have a life outside of football. And, it has gotten weird, and I think people egg him on a little bit, and that might exacerbate the issue. But Aaron Rodgers has played well enough in his career. 4 MVPs, 2 consecutive just 2 years ago. He's earned the right to be a little bit of a weirdo if that's what you want him. That's how you want to characterize him. And Tom Brady was an eccentric guy in his own way, right? And a very obsessed guy in his own way. And so I don't think that should be something that, if you're a Jets fan or you're a Packers fan, like, look, you talk to, I lived in Wisconsin for 6 years. My wife's from there. Like, you talk about the 70s and 80s. Like, if you're a Packers fan, like, those were dark years. You made the playoffs like once in 25 years or something like that. Be careful what you wish for a new quarterback, because it's not going to be pretty.
Well, Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur coming into that situation there, their record over those 4 years, fantastic for Matt. And yet now they're going to be turning the page and going to a new quarterback who's not seen the field, right? How many games has Jordan Love played?
He got the one start against Kansas City. He played the very, very end of the he was third string his rookie years. He never dressed as a rookie. He had the start against Kansas City, which didn't go very well. They only scored 7 points in that game. He played the second half of a Detroit game in Week 18 last year, a game they lost to a bad Detroit team. He came off the bench against Philly once and was fairly solid. So we really have mixed reviews on him. I think he's one of those, again, like, you think about how much more do you know about him than somebody like Anthony Richardson. Like, both the guys are super toolsy. At least with Richardson, you have some SEC competition, where with Love, it's mostly Mountain West. It's an unknown, and you have to bank on LaFleur. And we really don't. You think about the history of Packers football. You have the success of Holmgren developing Favre, with Andy Reid. You have the success of McCarthy developing Rodgers. Mike Sherman was there at the very beginning of Rodgers, but it was mostly McCarthy, for better or worse. People don't like him, but he did that. LaFleur has been a great coach. He's won 13 games 3 times in his career, but there isn't evidence that he can develop a quarterback. He did take Rodgers out of a bad string of play into a great string of play, but he didn't develop a quarterback from A to Z. And so that is a real big unknown that we don't necessarily know if he can do that. So if you're a Packers fan, you better hope that he has the goods there, because otherwise you're going to be looking for a new head coach, because it's just hard. And for better or worse, and whether it's fair or not, the success of the quarterback is blamed on the coach and eventually the GM.
Well, look, anytime you're a general manager getting an opportunity, I will speak for general managers, your quarterback situation is what's driving you, right? Think about those two gentlemen, good football guys, there's no question. Goody has been around forever scouting. We all scouted together, and Matt LaFleur, raised as a coach. He's obviously got a good football mind. And yet you pray to come into a situation where you have a quarterback. Think about that. The established side of Aaron Rodgers, let's not get away from the topic here. They're not having to draft a first-time quarterback out of the college ranks and project.
Yeah.
They're riding the tails for sure. And you should.
Yep.
Good for them. There are a lot of guys that get the GM job, and within 2 years, they don't have a shot in hell because they don't have a quarterback. And there's no quarterback in sight. I sit there right now and I look at Atlanta. Of course, I'm always going back to look at Atlanta, and I have some really good feelings. I want them to do well. I've said many times that I really like, where Arthur Smith is as a coach, and he's got that running game going. And I honestly, from the bottom of my heart, I hope Terry Fontenot, everything goes well with him. I like Terry personally, and they have a situation right now from a quarterback standpoint. They bring someone in, ostensibly they're bringing someone in from Washington, Heineke, to be a guy, but they also have a guy that they're saying they're building around a rookie from last year. And I started reading some of the stats. It was in Peter King's column about the further he got down the field throwing the ball and his negative percentages for Ritter.
Yeah, when he was at Cincinnati, his misses were bad, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people like his pocket presence, but when you have accuracy issues, it's going to be hard. And when you play in an offense like that, it's weird, because the last quarterback Arthur Smith had was Ryan Tannehill. And when you think about Tannehill as a limited passer, but what he was is accurate in the intermediate part of the field and deep. And so if you're going to run the run, pass offense where you're running a lot on early downs, you really do need to throw the football accurately on second down and third down. Otherwise, you're going to miss a lot of possessions worth of games. Now, let's actually stick with the Falcons.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of their moves, because obviously I think this makes you feel pretty well. Like they went ahead, they gave Lindstrom the top guard deal, right, of this time. McGarry, a right tackle, they gave a modest deal to about 10 or 11 million per year. They go David Onyemata, who is a defensive lineman from basically their rival, the Saints. Onyemata, 49 pressures in 2020. That was his career high. He's had a suspension, and he's seen his play decrease a little bit. So you got a little bit of value there. 3 for 24.5 for him. And then they splash, in the secondary, they go Jesse Bates, 4 years, 64 million. The thing I worry about, Thomas, is when they took over that team, there were some cap overflows from the previous time. They do some work. They get rid of Matt. They get rid of Julio. They do all these things. Matt's a premium player. Julio's a premium player.
Ridley, they lose.
And Ridley, they lose. Not really their fault, but those are premium players at premium positions, wide receiver, quarterback, and you go ahead and replace them with good players, but you're looking at guard and tackle were already taken care of. But you look at the acquisitions, you're looking at defensive tackle, kind of a swing guy, right, and then a safety, and you're like, well, where is the production going to come from at premium positions, right? You got Pitts, and Pitts, plays
London.
tight end. And then you got London, quarterback, like you said, really, really suspect a little bit. They trade Jonnu Smith, of course, or no, they get Jonnu Smith in a trade. And so where's the production going to be for them at defensive end? Where's the production going to be for them at, other than AJ Terrell, at corner? Where's the production going to be for them at secondary wide receiver positions? That's the question I have to see answered by the Falcons before I'm like, okay, this is a team in the AFC South I'm going to buy into, because they're doing a great job up the middle. It's now on the flanks that I need to see some movement.
So let's start talking. I know we've already discussed it, but let's talk a little bit about quarterback leading into the rest of the conversation. We talked about this a number of times 2 years ago when they had an opportunity to potentially draft one of the quarterbacks. Might have been the quarterback that was is sitting there pretty at Chicago.
Yeah.
Let's just say hypothetically they didn't go for Kyle Pitts and they decided to get a quarterback then. How much different would their situation be right now? No one really knows, right? Waited 1 year, come back last year in a year that really was not a strong, we know that. It was a very pedestrian year as far as quarterbacks coming out. So what we often talk about in the NFL, we have to know if you have your scouting staff in the right spot and you're thinking visionary, you're seeing that if you don't take a quarterback, you usually try to press your scouting staff and your general manager or whoever it is, or your personnel people as a general manager, to say, what's next year's quarterback class like, right? Mm-hmm. That's part of our job, and not just be thinking in a vacuum, right? So let's just say they in fact did look, which I would hope they would have looked into the next year, thinking that there's going to be someone there. Now there's not necessarily, right?
Yeah.
And so, they end up moving on from Matt Ryan. It becomes a little bit of a little bit of a swirl. There's a better word for it in that quarterback situation that, everyone's accountable for that. Yeah. I mean, the owner, I know Arthur Blank, the owner is going to look there and say, were we thinking about the next year after we took a tight end instead of a quarterback?
Yeah.
What was our game plan for the next 2 or 3 years?
Well, and that was the whole, and that's where it got rough, right? Because there was the money movement with Matt Ryan, right? That effectively kind of guaranteed, a lot of money to him in years 1 and 2. So to take Fields at 4 in 2021 would have meant, at least for half of that rookie deal, you're paying both guys. And so you lose a little bit of that edge, but it came at the expense of you come around and people like Sam Howell, but Sam Howell was one of the favorites to be the first overall pick. And it's I don't know about, I'm not a great quarterback evaluator, but you're looking at Sam Howell. If Sam Howell's on DraftKings as the favorite to be the number 1 pick, or somebody like that is the favorite to be the number 1 pick the following year, I'm not waiting until that next year, right? Sam Howell's kind of a shorter guy, not a great athlete. He's a great athlete, but not a great thrower, all this stuff. You had to know that if you passed up on Fields, you had to figure something out the following year. And what they did was obviously go in on Deshaun Watson for a little bit. They were part of that 4-team group. And yet, like, obviously that didn't work. You had to know that you were maybe in a crunch there, that there were other teams that could outbid you. And then you had to get rid of Matt. And now you're stuck because all the stuff in 2022, there's no quarterbacks, as you said, even worthy of their pick or even close to that. And then now this year, you're good enough because you're a good coach, Arthur Smith. You're a good talent evaluator, Terry Fontenot. You get some decent pieces in there, and the NFC is weak enough where you're not even able to pick that high again because you're able to win football games running the football and playing, not great defense, but passable defense at times. And so now you're stuck for another year. You're basically going to have to trade up to get a quarterback if you want one high.
Yeah. So let's say this. In Atlanta's defense, I would say there are a myriad reasons normally that a team would not take a guy like Justin Fields, right? Like, look, this might sound really odd to most of the listeners or not. You look at so many levels when you're looking at acquiring a quarterback, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying because they passed up on Justin Fields. It could have been other people. I mean, look, there could have been a guy that ended up going to New England that they might have been able to trade back.
Mac Jones could have been Mac Jones was in the running for being the third pick in that.
But just so everyone knows, I mean, Justin Fields, he's got Georgia ties. Sometimes we even go to a spot when we're putting things together. Do we really want a family in your backyard watching practice every day?
Yep.
There was some talk about that.
Yep.
I mean, I'm not saying this is for any team like that. So there are reasons that you pass up. I get it. If you miss fully on someone, that's one thing. Sometimes you miss for other reasons, not just because of the view of someone's skills, right? So that, I think, is a really important thing. Now that you're in a situation, let's segue a little before we move on from Atlanta. Let's segue into, they have a solid offensive line. Let's not kill them like we used to get killed all the time.
Of course. No. You got some guys there that have developed, right? I mean,
but let's go back to Deshaun Watson. No, they pass. Let's talk about, a little bit of, a conversation with, Lamar Jackson and passing, at least ostensibly saying they're going to pass. Okay. What's your opinion? Why do you think that they would pass given their current quarterback situation?
I think that there are teams that are hesitant to get in a bit. So it's a couple of reasons. Like, we all know people with the Ravens. We're really big fans of Eric DeCosta, his entire staff. People, listen to the show, friends of ours. Like, there is an issue in the league where sometimes if a team, like the Ravens have done so many good moves over the past 5 years that I do think that there's a little bit of like, hey, if the Ravens are offering this to us, there's something wrong here. Like, they're not a fish. It's the whole, like, if you're looking around the poker table and you can't find the fish, you're the fish. And so I think with the Ravens, there's a little bit of respect there where if they're having a hard time with Lamar, then maybe it's Lamar's problem, not the Ravens' problem. I think that's one issue. Mm-hmm. I think that also Atlanta, they sort of know that the Ravens like Lamar. And they're not letting it out here. They're not letting him open here because he's a bad guy or they don't want him on the team. It's literally that they can't agree on a contract that's fair. And so why should you do the negotiation for a team like the Ravens unless you can poison pill the whole deal? And it's very clear from the signings. When you look at Jesse Bates, you look at Animata, you look at bringing in Jonnu Smith, who still has a decent amount of on his contract. Like, they want other players on the team. Just for a team to basically do the Lamar thing and make it so that the Ravens have no shot, you have to basically front load that deal and make it a deal that the Ravens can't match.
Do you think there's any chance they look at this? And I would suggest they probably do, because the smart teams out there, and I do believe that Atlanta has intelligence about them all the way from the top down. They're saying, okay, we can give away 2 picks and then a boatload of money, of course, and guaranteed money as it stands as far as doing the Lamar deal. And we're going to be tossing away picks, 2 first rounders in the next 2 years, right? Or do we sit at 8 and do we say the probability of getting one of these young quarterbacks in our quiver by 8 is fairly small? There may be a run on them in the top 5 or 6, right?
Yep.
And then all of a sudden they're not there. However, would you say, look, we will monitor the situation, and we will stay at 8 until it's time to potentially move up. And if we have to move up to get one of these young quarterbacks that we like, then we'll do that. We would much rather do that than give away categorically, 2 picks and $250 million guaranteed. Let's do it that way.
Yeah, I also think like there's a part of this that the team that might go after Lamar might go after him after the draft. So if you're a team like Atlanta, who's picking in the top half of the first round, you get Lamar, you're a contender, right? And if you wait until after the draft, the Ravens might not even have enough ammunition to keep him, right? If you give him a contract, but also if you get Lamar, you think that you're going to be good, and so you're trading. We talk about this all the time with PTJ. You're trading a 2024 one and a 2025 one, which are worth, by the league standards, a round less than they are now. And if you Lamar, you are expecting to be picking in the 20s. So you're giving up even less there. So I do think that there's a little bit of teams waiting out on this and not wanting to give up, a big time number 1 pick. It's like Detroit. Say the Detroit Lions, there's been a lot of rumors there, right? And Detroit has the 6th pick now, and the rules are you have to give up either your pick or better. So they would have to give up that pick to get Lamar now. But Detroit has that's not even their pick. That's the Rams pick. But also Detroit has designs on winning that division. And so maybe they say, look, if Anthony Richardson falls to us, we'll take him. If not, we'll open up the Lamar discussion. It might mean that this Lamar and the Ravens saga is going to go on for a while.
It might be. We could talk forever about it. Before we leave Atlanta quickly, defense, I want to bring this up. You're a team that's, last year was 7 wins, right? That's a little edgy. And I know Arthur Blank. I mean, Arthur is a guy who's 2 years and beyond, man, things start getting him edgy. I get it.
Yeah.
I know that he made it pretty public that he was committing to this regime. And that's a great thing for them, of course, right? That he's going to have some patience. That's not always the situation with some owners that have a really aggressive style. All right. You bring in a new coordinator, right? You had Dean Pease, very reputable D coordinator forever. And those of you who are at Atlanta who didn't, feel that good about what he produced here, unfortunately, he didn't. And, probably for a number of reasons, whether it was personnel or whatever it was, they bring in Ryan Nielsen, right? He comes from their nemesis, right? He's coming from the Saints. He brings in some Saints players, right? That's natural.
Yeah.
This defense is going to be a lot riding on top of the fact that they bring in Jesse Bates. It's not just one person, though. You're not just going to win with a safety, right?
Yeah.
Where they are with their corner situation, where they are with their defense is going to be a really important part of how this team evolves.
When it comes around to kind of a guy, your last first-round pick, right? AJ Terrell is a guy who he's had, kind of a rough rookie year, great second year, injuries last year, and at times, not as high a play, but that's a cornerstone player, right? That's a player that you can sort of build around. But we know, and we talk about this, if you go to SumerSports.com and read our articles, the secondary is a weak link system, right? You need, Bates is not necessarily one of those safeties that kind of plays in the slot or anything like that. He's kind of a deep guy, right? And Terrell's not a slot, not a follower. He's more of an outside guy. Mm-hmm. You probably through the draft need to go in. And again, this goes down to the quarterback problem. If you want to build this defense, you got to throw some numbers at the secondary. And it's just a really hard problem. And you think about the great years that you guys had. You had Trufant, you had Brian Poole, you had Alford, you had KZ, you had Neil, and all those guys, Allen. You had depth there, right? And even the year that you made the Super Bowl, Trufant left with an ACL midseason. You still kept it around because you had some depth. And when it got difficult is when the depth got it. When you had so many injuries that the depth got eaten into. That's where I think if you're looking at this, you need one really stud pass rusher. Lorenzo Carter, sort of made his way, into the fold a little bit, but you need depth in the secondary. To me, that's where Atlanta, I think, that's the next step for them in contention.
Yeah, and to finish them off, this city, we're here in Atlanta now. There's a lot of people on the edge of their seat waiting to see what's going to happen.
Yep.
And at whatever level you look at, you can talk about defense, you can talk about athletic, offensive players. It comes down to the quarterback, and this city will not be happy with a pedestrian quarterback. So it's imperative that they get a producer in that position.
I want to talk about a quarterback that maybe is not pedestrian, but is also not of the sort of elite ilk, and that's Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo signed a 3-year, $67.5 million deal with the Las Vegas Raiders. Garoppolo, over the past, since he joined San Francisco, when you look at, expected points added, adjusted expected points added, things like that, engineered some really, really good offenses in San Francisco. But I think, for the most part, guys like guys that scout these guys, don't just look at the numbers, that actually look at how the production is generated. You would say that Jimmy G is probably a middle of the pack quarterback at best, right? And yet this Raiders team last season, they kind of go all in. They go Chandler Jones. They re-up Max Crosby. They trade some draft picks for Devontae Adams. They buy into Carr a little bit. All that, they were 6-1 to win the AFC West. They were still in a division where Chiefs are the king, Chargers are a playoff team, and the Broncos have Russell Wilson. They now take a little bit of a step back, but they just signed Jacoby Myers. They got Philip Dorsett as a free agent as well. They did trade Darren Waller, so that's a little bit of they get the 100 overall pick for that trade. But I'm wondering what the goal has to be here for the Raiders, because the draft picks that they had for a while through bad luck or through whatever, haven't worked out. The cupboard's a little bare on that side of the ball. You know that they're going to be okay on offense with Garoppolo and Josh McDaniel, Devontae Adams. But what are they doing holistically in a division where it's going to be hard just to even get in the conversation with the Chargers and the Chiefs? It's
going to be hard. And let me backtrack by saying, okay, Garoppolo, we know the bond with Josh McDaniels, right? And you have a GM and a head coach that come from the Patriot paradigm. And I can't express this more. You listen to Scott Pioli on NFL Network, and he can riff up and down, left, right, and center about where we are when you come from the Patriot paradigm, right? It's a special place at a lot of levels. A lot of people are jealous of it. A lot of people don't want to give it, its due. The reality is it's a very protected group, right? Even Nick Caserio down in Houston, right? They go always, when you're in New England, at least many people, go back to their comfort level. I'm going to bring some people from New England who know the New England Patriot way, right? Again, it doesn't carry the same cachet right now, but only it should, because you have one of I'd say the best coach to ever coach in the game. But
the best player in the league history.
And the best player in the league history. What I'm saying here is, Josh has a spot where it was a tough spot last year, right? Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of darts heading their way. They need someone in there that they can trust, even if Garoppolo is midline. Do you think he's a top 15 quarterback?
I think in the right offense, he certainly can produce at that level.
He's had injuries, however. He is, in some of those really special spots when you expect that guy to stand tall, literally.
I was there. I was at the Chiefs-Niners Super Bowl, and again, it's that part where, you think about like the skill sets, right? With Tom, when he was starting out, a very like middle of the pack quarterback for most of the game, and then in the fourth quarter, when John Madden's begging the Patriots to take a knee at the end of the Rams Super Bowl, drives them down, gets them in field goal range. With Garoppolo, it's like he's actually sort of the opposite. He's like a very good quarterback at first 3 quarters, and you wonder, can he take you over the top? And this is a problem with the Raiders, right? But you think about one score loss after one score loss after one score loss after one score loss. You wonder if they're able to, curb that with Garoppolo. Now, I guess the question becomes, they pick at 7, right?
Yep.
Richardson could be there. Will Levis, I think, will almost assuredly be there. Do you think that Garoppolo at this number is a bridge to the next guy? Or do you think that this is we're going to make sure that, we're above a certain threshold for a certain amount of time? Because we saw this last year, right? Kwesi Adofo-Mensah gets in. Kevin O'Connell gets in. They want to raise the water level so they can buy themselves time. When you were at the Falcons, you go 11-5 your first year. You get a wild card spot. You're competitive in the playoffs. The raise of the water level allows you to do your thing. Do you think that after a year of going, I believe it's 7-10, 6-11, are they just trying to get on the green here with a guy who, and I hate saying this because it sort of is not analytical, but a guy who does win. Jimmy Garoppolo wins football games. You look at his career record, he does know how to win football games. He knows how to engineer good offense. Do you think that this is a move that is a bridge to another guy with more upside, or do you think it's something to get on the green for them?
Let me start by saying I have a great deal of faith in Josh McDaniels. I think he's one of the best offensive minds out there. I think he's really good. Now, it's a different story when you're running the show, right? Everyone should know that. I mean, when you're a coordinator, it's very, very different than when you're a head coach. So there's a lot on your plate, and you can't focus the same way you'd like to, but you can't. There's a lot going on. Let me start by saying that. There's no question. I don't want to answer for them, the team builders in Las Vegas right now. I personally would say no question about it. It is getting on the green. It's keeping you alive. It's keeping an owner who, although the owner is giving you the thumbs up, you know how owners can be sometimes. I mean, that may change quickly when the train's set. I know you guys get sick and tired of me saying that. The train set is not operational or it's squeaky. So I think you have to have someone that's going to get you in the spot where people are feeling good. That there's a threshold there. And I think they would have an opportunity to potentially take someone, again, at 7. I think there's a great opportunity to do that. What's this number? This number right now is 72.75 over 3 years. What's that?
It's like a middle class quarterback contract.
It's a middle class.
Yeah, and I think it depends upon the guarantees. I was reading 67.5, 72.5. It's under $25 million, right? Yeah. So you're not paying a ton for him.
That's right.
And we've seen teams with Garoppolo making similar amounts of money make Super Bowls, make NFC title games. So I don't hate it, but I also think you look at the schedule, right? And I just want to read off their schedule a little bit. You have Detroit, who's supposed to be pretty good. You have Kansas City twice. You have Los Angeles Chargers twice. You have your Patriots, Jets, who we just talked about going to get Rodgers, Packers, who might lose Rodgers but are still really well coached. The Vikings, who won 13 games last year, the Dolphins, Bills, Steelers, and Giants, right? The Steelers and Giants had winning records last year.
Yeah.
That is a tough schedule when you're going in and you think about, and I love doing this exercise sometimes, how many of these games do the Raiders have the better quarterback? It's much less than half. And so, it's an uphill battle, but I think, as you said, Josh McDaniel, what I really like about McDaniel is you think about some of these coaches in the league that have gotten second chances. Where Dick Vermeil, the distance between chance 1 and chance 2, that's a Super Bowl winning coach, right? Pete Carroll, right? He got fired by the Patriots in 98. Yep. He's the coach of the Seahawks in 2010, right? That's a gap. That's a Super Bowl winning coach. McDaniel, of course, had his chance as the coach in Denver in 2009 and then 10. Yep. Starts 6-0, basically falls apart after. But then you have that distance. You have that time to learn. You have that time. You're always thinking, and we were talking earlier today about second chances for people. You're always you're thinking about, you get a decade to be like, I failed. What would I do better the next time? And I think that no other better apprenticeship than a second time with Belichick to sort of do that. So I do think I'm bullish on McDaniel with the Raiders. And if he can elevate Garoppolo the way that Shanahan did, then I think that a lot is possible.
All right. Before we move on, I got to ask you a tough question, right? I'm going to keep throwing these GM questions to you. I'm the owner. Do you think Jimmy Garoppolo, when the crap hits the fan, when everyone's in his face and the money's on the line, can he win it for you consistently?
My answer is no, but I also think that we're going to win some games by multiple scores, much like the Niners did, because of him, because he doesn't he's good enough to get you ahead in some games that you should be ahead in. That's maybe the way to put it. But no, I don't. And so does that mean that does my answer imply that you got to take Will Levis at 7? What does that mean?
Well, no, because I'm worried about Will Levis. I mean, right? That's exactly right. But do you keep him? Do you keep him in the wings? Do you develop him a little bit more with a guy that you can you can be on the positive side and you can of the win schedule or the win numbers? That's an important place to be.
Yeah. Let's talk a little analytics here for the Raiders just to finish this off. They get Jacoby Myers, formerly of your Patriots, 3 years, $33 million. Jacoby Myers was 23rd in a stat called yards per route run. Yards per route run if you just look at really simple efficiency statistics among wide receivers,
Yep.
that one's the best one. He's at about 1.9. That was better than Deebo Samuel. That was better than a lot of really good players in the NFL last year. I called him the Robert Woods of this class. Remember when Les, went out and got Robert Woods from Buffalo? Robert Woods was playing with E.J. Manuel. He was playing with a bunch of quarterbacks that really couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, but he was getting open. Les, of course, very intelligent front office there, goes and gets Robert Woods. He's a plus player for that team, Super Bowl caliber player for that team. I think Myers, when you look at, obviously played with Brady for a little bit, but from the second part on, you're looking at guys like, Cam Newton, you're looking at Mac Jones, not necessarily quarterbacks that elevate you. I think that's a really good value signing for them.
Okay, I do. I really do like that signing. But before we move on, and maybe we can head over to New York and talk about Waller a little bit. I mean, when you think about that moving on from a guy, again, I've heard people talk about this. I mean, any of those quarterbacks that might have some issues, a young quarterback that they might draft at the 7th overall pick, I'm back still staying with Las Vegas. When you think about moving on from a talented, athletic tight end, you have a little bit of a hole there.
Yep.
So all I would add from again, Patriot paradigm idea, and I want your analytic take on it. But first, there's a reason. There is no way Josh knows about working with tight ends. He's not moving on from this guy if there wasn't an overview of something, whether it was injuries, could be character, who knows, or personality issues. You never know. He is a type of guy, as I know Josh fairly well. We work together, and I have a great deal of respect for him. He's not going to stay there with just a guy. Because it is a really good draft, tight end draft,
yeah.
He probably thinks they're going to have an opportunity in rounds 2 or 3.
Which you wonder about, because tight ends, of course, age better than most. Now, Waller got a slower start in the NFL because he had the drug problems and everything, so he's a little older than maybe his production would suggest. I just pulled up this guy. You were part of the acquisition, but you think about who McDaniel's had at tight end. He's had Daniel Graham. Yep. He's had Ben Watson. He's had real tight. Like I say this respectfully as somebody who was a very incomplete tight end myself, but Waller is not a blocker. Waller's a detached guy. Waller's an athletic guy. Waller's a very productive guy, but he's not. I mean, you think about the history of New England tight ends, and Daniel Graham was Daniel Graham not only played for McDaniel in New England, but also played for him in Denver, right? Mm-hmm. A guy who's a very complete player at the position. And you wonder if that's something, they have Foster Moreau there, a guy from LSU who's more of a complete tight end, kind of a bigger guy who's evolving, even wears Gronk's number 80. That's maybe who he's looking for. Now, with the Giants, you think about, okay, fail on Evan Ingram. Tight ends almost always do better for their second team. Yep. Waller was a Raven before, but effectively this is his second real team. They buy into him there. We make actually because of Waller's injury history and some of his decline, we make the 100th pick a little bit more valuable. Mm-hmm. But you can obviously see the upside there. If Waller does return to the player he once was, it's a bang up acquisition for the Giants, and it helps you because he's inexpensive to a certain extent. It helps you curb the Daniel Jones signing, which is an expensive one for them.
It's an expensive one. And one of the biggest moves, and you guys have heard me say it before, with Matt Ryan and his development, we were very bullish on bringing Tony Gonzalez. And I would just say, I love tight ends. I love them. I just think there's such high percentage. We talk about that again and again. And when you're going into your second year as a head coach and as a general manager, Joe Shane, and when we start talking about that group and how they want to approach things, to know that they just sunk a ton of money into a quarterback, that they love how he's evolving. We had a little conversation about Barkley or Joe. We can talk about that. But my point is to have a tight end that has background. That's a settling feeling.
Well, it's a person that helps. So we talk about weak links, right? We talk about not being fragile. Yeah. A tight end helps so many parts of the offense when he's a complete player. He helps the tackles. He helps the wide receivers. You think I want to talk a little bit. I want to transition a little bit into the Super Bowl champion Chiefs, because I think it dovetails into this, right? Because you have, the Chiefs just let Juju Smith-Schuster walk. He took a deal with New England just today. I'll get the financials in a little bit. They let Orlando Brown walk. They cut Frank Clark. The one move they do get is a 4-year, $80 million deal with Jawan Taylor, a tackle out of Florida, previously of the Jaguars. When you think about Kelsey, the Chiefs last year, I was watching that Buffalo playoff game while I was rowing the other day. I'm like thinking their wide receivers in that game were Byron Pringle, Demarcus Robinson, I think Josh Gordon, and Tyreek Hill. So you're thinking if you can cover Tyreek Hill, Chiefs have hardly any shot except for Kelsey as well. They in a very counterintuitive move trade Tyreek Hill last year. They replaced him with Juju Smith-Schuster, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Sky Moore, and Justin Watson. And they go ahead and they're an even better offense. And the reason, of course, for that is that Travis Kelce does so much, right? Those other wide receivers do a great job. We talk about, they fit together. When you look at our podcast, we talk about wide receivers. Those wide receivers fit together well, but Kelce makes the whole thing turn around, right? And it makes the whole thing turn. And you look at that team, when they're in 3rd and long, they run 12 personnel sometimes. No one does that anymore. Because their tight ends can do so many things. They can help the tackle and pass pro. They can help, Andrew Wiley, your right tackle, was a replacement level player kind of for a long time, ended up starting 70-something games, gets an $8 million deal with Washington. He needed help on a significant fraction of plays by their tight ends. So I think to your point, the Chiefs very much buy into this idea that if you have an elite player at that position, it covers a multitude of sins. And now, they're able, to take away from the wide receiver core, because Juju was going to be expensive, and buy into a tackle position that I think that they felt they were a little bit weaker at.
Yes. So, which brought me to something that I believe heavily in, and that is you have a head coach in Andy Reid who has a soft spot for Aaron Souls, right?
Yeah.
He's one of the best to be able to deal with it. It's why people often ask, how does Kansas City pull off bringing in some of these guys? I'm bringing this back to Tyreek Hill, right?
Yeah.
So there's a reason you're not getting rid of Tyreek Hill if he hasn't worn thin on you. And if you've worn thin on Andy Reid and company, boy, that means there must have been something there. My only point there is, I love how Andy and Brett approach that. They understand that you can play with some guys that aren't necessarily, always on the top end of, the spectrum as far as.
But even Kelsey was that kind of player, right? Out of Cincinnati, he got kicked off of his own team. Tyrann Mathieu was kicked off of his college team.
Yes.
Has always had a reputation for being a little prickly. Frank Clark, had his issues at Michigan.
Sure did.
And all those players. Kareem Hunt had his problems at Toledo and had his problems in Kansas City. To your point, it had to take a really egregious sort of episode for him to leave Kansas City. But they're a team where you think about continuity. Year after year after year, you're able to get people to buy in. Very similar to the Patriots. You think about Chad Ochocinco, Albert Haynesworth, Randy Moss, all those players that came in because they want to be a part of a winner, and you can get values that way.
So it's interesting. Staying with the Chiefs for a minute, when you talk about a coach like this, understand that there are many coaches out there that think when they move from being a coordinator to being a head coach, that they are going to be able to make that move and continue to carry their thought processes as a coordinator. I dealt with all those wayward souls and those tough guys and those fringe guys. They're the best players. I'll bring them on to my team when I'm the head coach. Yeah. They become a head coach, and my God, if they have the patience of a pea, meaning they're no longer can they deal with it, and it's no longer one little element. It's a much bigger element, right? So as a head coach, I'm just coming back to really lauding Andy Reid on that, because I've been around coaches who have been great coaches, but when they become the head coaches, their patience. Mine and Mike Smith's, when we were talking about it a few episodes before. We're talking about one defensive end from Purdue.
Yeah, Ray Edwards.
We talked about Ray Edwards.
Yeah.
And Mike Smith thought 100%, I'm fine. Let's bring him in. I can deal with these guys. I've dealt with these cats before. And it wasn't before too long that we were faced in a Saints locker room where it got really, really wily. And I remember Mike looking at me. He's like, I'm done. And sure was as it is. We had to make a move. Point on that is look, there are a lot of head coaches out there that think they can deal with people they can't necessarily, and Andy's done a great job.
And it's really interesting. I want to, we're talking about free agency today, but I do want to, because we are in the recommendations business, we are in the, by the way, we're closing in on the first hour here. We do really thank you all for coming and hanging out with us at our live first in person show here. If you like what you see, obviously hit the like button, subscribe, rate, and review to the show. Obviously, the 5-star reviews are always welcome, and obviously feedback is great. We do have a live, very lively chat. We have had one for the last 3 nights. We really appreciate everybody that has come to join us. We at SumerSports are, of course, in the recommendation business. I think of, N=1 is not a great thing to buy into, but you look at what Andy Reid's career entailed. You're a quarterback coach with Mike Holmgren, with Brett Favre. One of the, in hindsight, a guy that is wild, right? Wild off the field, of course, but wild on the field, right? I think a lot of coaches like and are brilliant at controlling the quarterback. Jared Goff, McVay in his headset until 15 seconds left.
Right.
And then you have the Andy Reid, because that head coach position is so many things. It's taking care of players. It's caring about his relationship with Frank Clark was apparently legendary, right? And a guy, again, very different backgrounds. Andy Reid's, a Mormon from Utah, and Frank Clark's not. So you get and he's a great human to all the people that, even though he shares differences with them, and yet, is there something, as we're trying to help these teams get hire coaches and that kind of thing? Is that something? Hey, you were a position coach for a very difficult player, stylistically. Brett was probably difficult off the field too, but stylistically a very difficult player. Whereas a guy like Jared Goff's probably a very easy player in the sense that he's going to go along with the structure.
Yep.
Is that a characteristic? Are we looking for that in the next coach? Because I don't know how many different playgrounds those coaches get to be on, right? When they're trying to showcase their talents, because I think it is a talent like that would translate from being a great assistant to a great head coach.
Yeah, and look, there's so much nuance there that we could talk about. Probably not necessarily for a free agent. I didn't mean to go off on a tangent. I do truly believe it is an important part of how you're putting together your team, because you have, as much as there are great players out there, if they're not fitting your coaches and your coach's style, to your point, man, you're pissing up the proverbial tree. I don't know if that's proper or not, but
we're fine. We're on the airwaves here. As we start hour 2, the league year is officially starting right now, and teams have to do things to get under the cap. They've had to do some things to get under the cap. The team that had to do, and maybe not the most, but went up to the wire before they could get stuff under the cap, is Kwesi Adolfo-Mensa's Minnesota Vikings. Kevin O'Connell and him last year constructed a team that went 13-4. They lost a home playoff game to the Giants, but they were very much a fun team to watch last year. They decided last year to extend Kirk Cousins 2 years, 2 void years as well. They were up against it. They go ahead and they cut Eric Kendricks, one of the key players that has played for their team for a long time. They have also cut Adam Thielen, a player who played in the same conference as me in college, the NSIC, probably the best player in the history of that conference, and one of the best wide receivers to ever wear a Vikings uniform. And I think when you look at them, they cut Adam Thielen. They took on all the dead money. They didn't post June 1 it. There wasn't a ton on Kendrick, so cutting him was fine. But you sort of saw those 2 moves, and you're like, okay, this team looks like they're going to bottom out a little bit in 23. Mm-hmm. They're gonna try to make sure that they can move into the next few years with as much cap space as totally possible. And then instead of doing what I thought would be a couple straightforward moves, which would be cut Zadarius Smith, cut Harrison Smith, cut or trade Dalvin Cook, and restructure Brian O'Neill, they give Kirk Cousins a restructured deal. Basically, they add 2 void years. You do need the player's permission to do that. So Kirk Cousins was an accomplice in this. They take the $20 million roster bonus. By the way, if you want to look at restructures, there's an article on SumerSports.com about it. They take that 20 years, they prorate it over 5 additional years, right? So the 4 void years, including this, and then the year he's playing this year. So that's how they get under the cap. And then they go and proceed to sign Byron Murphy, a corner from Arizona, previously of Washington, Marcus Davenport from UTSA, a former first-round pick of your rival, the Saints, and then Josh Oliver, a tight end from the Ravens. Those are their sort of three big pickups. So now the Vikings are kind of in this position where they maybe aren't tanking this year, but they're not exactly all in. What's your read on this? Because you didn't really have necessarily those kind of years in Atlanta. Like you had, you built a contender right away. You kind of had a couple, maybe the first year under Dan Quinn when you win 8-8. Maybe that's similar to this, but like, can you give me an idea of what the Vikings are thinking? Are they trying to be competitive in a weak NFC while also trying to plan for the future? Because it felt like they got to play last year, and then they're like, okay, party's over. Let's kind of chill out in 23. But then the Cousins restructure and some of these signings give rise to this idea that they could try to be winning this year.
Before we move on, I'm going to give you every opportunity right now to take back that phrase of suggesting that an NFL team is tanking this early in the process. That because I know that's not what you meant.
Well, I don't mean tanking. I do mean, though, like if you look at what Chicago did last year, Chicago had a great deal of, much like so Minnesota, and this will be an interesting case study because Minnesota and Chicago were at similar straits, right? Mm-hmm. The Vikings were kind of that. The Vikings were 8-9 the year before Adolfo-Mensah and O'Connell took over. The Bears were 6-11, right? They played the final game. If the Vikings would have lost, they would have had the same record, right? So they were very similar as far as on-field performance. And, the Bears had a young quarterback, so maybe that helped. But the Vikings had kind of a good quarterback, but a quarterback who, I think most people put him in the Jimmy G realm. Mm. The Bears trade Khalil Mack. They cut some other players. They absorb a lot of dead money right away. Now, you can call it tanking. You can call it whatever you want to call it. But in the final game of the season, they were playing Nathan Peterman. Nathan Peterman was playing too well. And then so they put in Tim Boyle, right? And so and Lovie Smith, God bless his soul, won his final game of the Houston Texans, and the Bears get the number 1 overall pick, and now everybody's excited for that. Now I'm not going to say tanking, but what I'm saying is they ripped off the Band-Aid a year earlier than the Vikings did, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
The Vikings, they pushed the contracts back on Thielen. They pushed the contract back on Aaron Smith. They pushed the contract back on Cousins. They gave themselves room to win in 2022. Now, those are two diametrically opposed. Win now and win then. Let's call it that. Like, is that is that an ownership sort of directive, or is that sort of a Adolfo-Mensah looking at the roster and saying, hey, we can win this year? And he's right. They won 13 games. Is that, if you look at the opposite, if you're buying polls, did you see the Chicago job as attractive because they let you have the clean slate? Like all those questions, I think you look at that, and they are two diametrically opposed approaches.
They are. Man, I think as you have your quest to be a general manager in this league, let's just say hypothetically you do, semantic responsibility is important. That's why I offered you the opportunity to take away tanking, because none of us have ever looked at our owners ever at any time we would even use the word tank. I get that. All I'm saying is there are many things at play here. I think they could be at play. We don't know it. Adolfo-Mensah, we like Kwesi, and we want Kwesi to be successful. For our business, we want him to be successful, right? He's the next guy, as everyone knows, since Sashi Brown, really, who had, obviously you have Andrew Berry, who's got a really strong background, but Sashi was full-on driven at the Browns. It didn't work out with he and who was his head coach?
Hugh Jackson.
Hugh Jackson. It didn't work out. My point is, Kwesi goes to Minnesota, and he has to win. He has to win now. I maintain that, Kwesi could look at all that, and he's very smart. As general managers, you get your first year in, unless you are given complete, sort of a complete runway from your owner, you're thinking, I'm taking over a really good football team. I better win now and log one win now, because to your point, my next 1 or 2 years might not be as successful.
Well, because they could try. So, and it's interesting. I was watching a Dallas Cowboys game from like '93, right? And this had been already one Super Bowl into Jimmy Johnson. And this is So he's a Super Bowl in.
Yeah.
And they showed his career record at 34 and 36, right? Because that was 1-15 and then 7-9. And then you finally, and like the 1-15 was fine. They traded Herschel Walker. They got a bunch of picks. But like ultimately what happened when you were in between jobs? You're like, I want to pull up my general manager record. Like, well, that 11-5 in year one sure as hell helps, right? And so you look at polls and you're like, okay, that's 3-14. So you have 13-4 for Adolfo-Mensah and O'Connell. You have 3-14 for polls. That 3-14, you're going to be battling back from that the rest of your career. And as you talked about a number of times, you don't often get a second chance. I think that you're right. I mean, the problem is that, and I say tank, like none of these things are intentional, but like I say, like in 2023, if you're the Vikings, if you try your best to win and you can't, then you're sort of left with worse straits than if you were just saying, look, this is going to be a rough year, right? And we should eat a lot of money the way that the Bears did, right? So when I think about the Vikings, I'm thinking, okay, you won 13 games last year. You have good players. You had a very fun season, and you come up for air, and now Detroit has better odds to win the Super Bowl than you do. That's kind of where I come at it and saying, like, could you have smoothed it out a little bit differently?
Yeah. No, look, I'm following on tracking everything you're saying here. And I have to tell you, I need to add this a little bit of a story because it's really, really funny. You were talking about records, right? You run records. So just so everyone knows, this was when I got fired and we were putting something together. You and I were working together. And I said, look, let's put together the last 10 years of general managers and let's just see where win rates are. We'll put mine in there and all the other guys that have gotten fired, and we'll just we'll see where we all are. And I say this in a loving enough way to Rich McKay. Remember, I asked you, I said, throw Rich McKay in, by the way. And by the way, just so you guys all know, Rich was our president at the Falcons, and I threw that out, and you ran it. And I was kind of semi-joking, and you ran it, and we were looking at the win rates of like guys like I think it was
like Rick Spielman.
Rick Spielman had 54-ish or whatever. There was some good, there were some good rates. And then, I think the highest rate was you. No, it was Ryan Grigson.
Oh, sure.
But Ryan was only 4 years in, right?
Yeah.
Love Ryan. I think he's right. But when we ran that and Rich's number was down at 25, I always say that. I'm like, God, I finally beat Rich at something. We'd go out and play golf all the time and marketing events. He would beat my ass. So I was excited about it. The reason I'm bringing that up is you're always looking as general managers and as coaches to try to compare to see that things are falling into place. Yeah. And back to when you bring up Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, this is an important run for him. Yep. He's going to look back and he's going to look at his win rate in year one. And that year one rate is going to be really important as he's even negotiating his contracts. Or if he ever, God forbid, is on that hot seat level, he can always use those really.
Well, I think if ownership in Minnesota is about winning and playing meaningful games in January every year, then you look and say, look, that was something that you guys wanted and we delivered it, right? Like that,
sure.
And that's certainly something. So look, like I like a lot of his signings. I thought Marcus Davenport was a terrific signing, 1 year, $13 million. One of the things about Davenport was he had a 3% sack rate in 2021, which is, pretty solid. He had a 0.3% sack rate in 2022. Which like sack rates are really oscillatory. So you think about Adolfo-Mensah and his background as a trader, you're buying low and selling high. You buy Davenport low, next year when you have more cap space, you can either franchise tag him and trade him, or you can actually buy into him, et cetera, et cetera. All these deals are pretty short. Byron Murphy, 2 for 22. That's a former second round pick. That's a player that kind of has inside-outside flexibility. So you're looking again at being able to curb weak ties. Garrett Bradbury is a guy, they drafted him. Spielman was a coach, and you get him at $5 million a year. That's a really, I think, solid contract for a guy who's just starting to play well. A lot of it makes sense. The thing about it that I need clarification on, I think, is just, the Cousins thing where you are, I think most people believe they're going to move on after this year, which is fine. I mean, he's had a good career in Minnesota. But when you do move on from him, that's a $28.5 million cap charge for a guy that's not playing on the team. Yeah. And you think yourself, if you're going to have a ton of cap space in 2024, and you might not be that good in 2023, all market indicators suggest that, why not eat that money now and kind of take your lumps? And especially if the Cousins, restructure came in lieu of letting go a guy like Dalvin Cook, who plays running back, and it's a position where once you start to show decline, it doesn't really come back. Harrison Smith's an all-time great Viking, so I understand wanting to keep him on the team. Yep. But you could have ripped the Band-Aid off in different ways, and it's just interesting that he chose that way.
Well, I do want to finish the conversation with him very quickly, and I'm beating it to death. We need to all cheer for Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. I mean, anyone who has any indication and interest, in data and analytics, you want a general manager who has a heavy data background to survive. You do not want him to flutter around. So we want things to work out really well for him. Not only because of that, but because you and I are both, I'm acquaintances with him, you're friends with him. And I think, you want someone like that. He's such a good guy. I remember very quickly when I interviewed him a couple years ago on my GM Journey thing with Andrew Berry. I got up from the sitting with him and the interview with him. We were interviewing some of the underrepresented rising stars. I got up, I looked at him, I looked at Andrew Berry, and I said, this guy's going to be the commissioner one day. Yeah. He is wildly intelligent, articulate, and just his energy. So again, cheering for him.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, I think that he certainly is on our side as well as far as analytics are concerned, and does a lot of things. Like I said, a lot of things make sense. And I think every single team kind of does things that make sense from an analytical perspective, and then some things that don't. So that's very much I think the reasoning here, and it's really hard to get rid of quarterbacks who are just good enough as well. And that's really where Cousins lands. Let's talk about the Bears. The other side of the coin. The Bears trade the first overall pick to Carolina. They get 9. They get a second. They get a first and a second. In subsequent drafts, they get DJ Moore. Then they go ahead and sign TJ Edwards, and they sign Tremaine Edmonds, and then they sign Nate Davis. All those guys are going to play positions kind of in that non-premium position, linebacker, guard. They let David Montgomery go. He goes to the division rival Detroit Lions. Montgomery's interesting because I think this is one of those where you're selling or you're letting him go while he's kind of on a dip here. Montgomery was just 34th in the NFL in 2022 in yards per carry after contact, and he was even worse in 21, 48th. So, you were starting to see Khalil Herbert actually take some of those carries. And so, it made sense the Bears would move on. But they are buying into new linebackers after trading Roquan Smith. That's kind of an interesting decision. But, they're very much leaving the premium positions, the tackles, the wide receiver, secondary wide receivers. They had DJ Moore using their draft picks, corner, defensive end. They're leaving those premium positions to the draft. And I actually don't mind that at all. I think free agency is to pick up those non-premium positions. And I think the Bears did a fine job so far.
Yes, I do. And do you want to segue into discussion about quarterback situation there or big picture?
So I guess this is interesting because they traded the first pick early, very clearly to give Justin Fields an indication that he's your guy, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe you can give a little bit of insight into what the value in that is, right? Because I actually personally think that there's a non-zero chance the Panthers trade that pick, but the Panthers just got, bought an option on it right now just to kind of, because the Bears were going to give it up because the Bears wanted to show Justin Fields they were committed to him. Be that as it may, you don't pick up a first-round pick and a second-round pick the next year unless you are open to the idea that you might have to use those picks to move up and get a quarterback should Fields falter. I do think that this is really a make-or-break season for Justin Fields. Don't you? I mean,
it's a really important year, yes. I think there's no other way you could have approached it, quite honestly, in my mind. I think what Ryan Poles and company did is the right thing to do. I really do. I think bringing in DJ Moore was another really important addition, an underneath guy. They have Chase Claypool, right? Yep. They need to continue to build that. Let's spend some time now building the offensive line, building it up, where they are with a tight end. Let's acquire a tight end. Who's their tight end?
Cole Kmet's a pretty solid.
He's a tight end. He's a solid tight end. But my point on it is what they've done now, moving back, free agency. Now you go into the draft and have an opportunity to look at some of the positions, i.e. O-line in the draft, I think can be very beneficial. I do not want to undersell or understate the importance of making sure that, and I said this the other day probably, when you're an organization and there's unease and uncertainty about a quarterback, the best way to give the quarterback a prop and a morale boost and your team, right? There's a lot of talking in that locker room. You know that. If Eric Eager is talking about that, the people that are close to him, they're talking about it. They're like, look, I love this guy. Does he really have what we're looking for? This is a big vote of confidence that the team needs right now. Now, back to a lot of pressure on a head coach and a general manager to make a big time move. That's a big move.
Well, we're all a product of our experiences, right? Like you think about Poles came from Kansas City, and like where did Kansas City had seasons, while he was there where you bought your time at quarterback, right? Like Alex Smith was that guy for a few years where it's like, do we really think Alex Smith is the guy that can take us to the promised land? Maybe, but he's got to sort of get to the next year, right? And there were Chiefs were reportedly in on Paxton Lynch the year before they were in on Mahomes, and there was a year where the Chiefs went a whole season without throwing a touchdown pass to a wide receiver, and I think that that can be. You look at the Bears wide receiving core last year, and that was desolate. So what they do, they trade a second rounder for Claypool. They trade, the number 1 overall pick, and, for DJ Moore and stuff. So you think about like where Poles has been, right? That team was 2-14 at one point. That team had no wide receivers at one point. That team had a quarterback that they weren't necessarily, super in love with at one point. And so I think Poles, when you look at, and they had the first overall pick in a year where they didn't really want it, right? And the Chiefs took Eric Fisher that year, but they could have traded if there was actually a number 1 quarterback, they probably would have traded that year. Mm-hmm. So like you think about like his experience and how it's going to sort of shape and mold his experiences in Chicago. I think that Fields is playing the role of Alex Smith, which is a very good quarterback who you're never going to close the door on moving on from, but you're also not all that nervous about every year, right? Like if it was just some other Joe Schmo quarterback, I don't know if Andy Reid moves heaven and earth to get him at 10 in 2017. I think he just keeps going with Alex Smith. And I think the same thing's true about Poles and Justin Fields here.
Yep, I agree. Look, that move that was made in the end, again, to me, it is so settling, and I don't want to beat it to death, but I'm glad we're talking about it. I'm glad we didn't avoid that topic because we've talked about it probably ad nauseum.
Yeah.
I think the last thing I would say is, as we're sitting here talking about this, which is really important, I know you're looking at me every once in a while. I'm texting. I literally feel like Garofalo and Pelissero because I'm getting guys from the NFL that are watching this, and they're saying, hey, what did you think about so-and-so that you had at the Falcons when you were there? These are personnel men asking me about some guys. So I think it's cool that people are watching and then in the middle of it asking about some of the stuff that we're doing.
We've sort of avoided live news here, but let's give out some live news that sort of happened over the past few hours. The Cowboys are going to release Ezekiel Elliott. That makes a lot of sense given they just franchise tagged Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard has been an amazingly efficient running back as the backup to Zeke, even at 1,000 yards this season as a runner, which is hard to do when you're the backup running back. You do have to wonder as volume goes up for Pollard, does efficiency go down? Zeke took a lot of beating and shielded Pollard from some of that. We just said that the Patriots signed Juju Smith-Schuster. Aaron Rodgers has made his decision. He wants to play with the Jets. They're still negotiating. Here's one that's interesting because you and I have disagreed on this before. Baker Mayfield signs the Bucs. Now, again, semantic responsibility, and it's funny. It's funny because the first time I ever, you were on a Football Life, the '95 Browns ones, and you used that. What did Pioli called you guys slappies, and you said I'm more semantically responsible than that. Like that was the first time I ever heard you say that.
First time I ever said it.
And you said that on air, and I was like, But it's a great phrase. JT might not think so, but,
well,
but
JT, I still want to talk to JT.
We got to get JT on the show
JT, we're going to talk to you for a guy who's got a PhD who doesn't care about the use of verbiage and that's a whole different story.
Yeah, well, we'll have to get him on to talk quarterbacks. He is very good at that, and he's actually a really cool dude. I actually think you guys are somewhat similar in that you guys are both, you guys are both on that like cool side of like, you guys both probably ride a bike. You know what I mean? Like I know you ride you're somebody.
He's a Cal Davis guy.
Yeah,
I know he rides a bike.
Yeah.
He has to.
Yeah, you guys, board in the mountains and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, you're outdoorsman that I aspire to be. Mayfield, again, semantic responsibility. The Buccaneers are not trying to lose this year, obviously, but because of the Brady thing, because they go all in, there is going to be a day of reckoning for teams like the Rams and the Bucs. And so the Bucs choose, and the Bucs signed Levante David today. That was another news that broke. They signed not Sean Murphy-Bunting. They signed Jamel Dean, who's a very good corner. I thought was going to be the Stephon Gilmore of this class. Mm-hmm. So they're very clearly not like just letting the thing burn. They get Mayfield. I've always said that Mayfield got a bad rap in Cleveland. He wasn't worthy of a second contract. I'm not saying that, but I thought, in the 32 games before Mayfield played for Cleveland, they were 1-31. In the 60 games that Mayfield played for Cleveland, who has been, they have not won a division title since 1989. In the 60 games Mayfield played for Cleveland, they were 30-30. So he very clearly brought a level of competence to that team that was not there before. There's a ceiling issue with him. Like he doesn't have that kind of ceiling. He's smaller. He gets injured a lot. He doesn't, he's kind of a stiff guy in the pocket, as far as reads and stuff. Can he have success in Tampa Bay? Because Tampa Bay's offense last year, they let Byron Leftwich go. It was stagnant for a lot of time. It was sort of like, let Brady, it's sort of like, let Brady do his thing in the fourth quarter, but first three quarters are going to struggle. I want to see him do well, but this is a situation where it may not be as conducive to his strengths as maybe if he would have stayed in LA or someplace like that.
Let me ask you, are you suggesting that they're bringing him there to be the dude?
Well, who else is it going to be?
What's the number? What's the number on him? Do you know?
It's 8.5.
8.5.
So
what else are they going to do?
It's him and Kyle Trask right now are the two quarterbacks.
I'm baffled to think that they would be. Look, Jason Light, I've said this time and again, he is a really good evaluator of talent, and he knows what he's doing. He had his chance, of course, to be the best general manager in the world by winning the Super Bowl, right? Yep. I do believe that. Jason knows what he's doing. He's bringing a guy like that in for a reason. He's competitive. He's tough. Yep. Those are things we grew up.
He played injured in 2020.
No, I respect the heck out of him that way. He's not like the full package that I've ever looked for in my mind, thinking that he's going to be the dude that's going to carry it all, right? And we've seen that that's not the case, at least in my mind. So I can't imagine that they would be bringing him there to carry it. Is he going to be working with someone? Is there going to be someone waiting? Are they going to really move up and draft someone? This isn't. I don't know what you're looking for. I'm a little surprised when I saw that. I don't know what you're looking for as far as, are you saying, do I think he's going to make the move, or do you?
Well, because I think that this is a move where I always talk about Alex Smith this way. Alex Smith was there to make the Chiefs look competent so that you could figure things out about your other players. Mm-hmm. You do not figure anything out about Travis Kelce unless Alex Smith is good enough to throw him the ball. You don't figure out about Tyreek Hill unless Alex Smith is going to throw him the ball. Now, the Bucs are not a young team, so that's where I get a little nervous here. But you start bringing in young linemen. They just cut Donovan Smith. Mm-hmm. You bring in young wide receivers, hopefully in the draft. Mike Evans is reportedly, they're reportedly thinking about trading him, although it wouldn't save them a lot of money. Guys like Mayfield, to me, are good enough for you to find out about the players around you. One of the reasons that Joe Judge was let go by the Giants, I don't think Joe Judge is a bad guy or anything, but they were when Daniel Jones got hurt and they were playing Mike Glennon and all that at the end of 2021, it had gotten so off the rails there that you couldn't learn things about players you're trying to develop. I think that there's a class of quarterback like Mayfield, like Jacoby Brissett, who just signed with the Commanders. That's another breaking news story. There's a class of quarterbacks that are good enough for you to evaluate your other players, and maybe not good enough to win with. And I think in transitional periods, those quarterbacks can be valuable.
They can. It's a really good point. I just know sitting in that seat, I couldn't waste 1 year of my life thinking about transition time. And that people might argue. I mean, we had one of our head of products. I'm talking about Chad Mills.
Yeah.
We argued at the beginning of me joining this company when we were putting things together. Chad and I went back and forth. Chad was all about projecting 5 years out. And I said categorically, most general managers are looking 1 and 2 years out, maybe 3 and being responsible, but 4 and 5, just it's in today's world, it doesn't happen unless you have an ownership group who's given you a really long range, which does not happen in today's world.
Well, and for you, because I mean, you made the NFC title game in year 3 or 4 of your career, and then you made the Super Bowl in like year 2 of the second. So like you bought yourself time. Light bought himself time by winning a Super Bowl and then making the playoffs 2 other times, winning. I mean, the Bucs just won their own division in back-to-back years for the first time in franchise history, right? So like you're talking about an ownership group that's willing to give him that time. And now the question becomes, again, like we talked about, I think about this with Joe Judge. Joe Judge like was given the go-ahead. Brian Billick, in the middle of 2007, was said, you are safe. And then they lost to an 0-13 Dolphins team, and they fire Brian. Like, to your point, like, you can get all the assurances you want, but you embarrass the franchise. And again, I don't mean this, but like, we've seen this in the history of the league before where guys get assurances that they're coming back and they exhale a little bit. And then the ownership's like, yeah, actually, I didn't mean that. Like, we're going to actually move on from you. And so I think to your point, like, how Baker Mayfield might be a good enough quarterback where it never does get that bad for you if you're Tampa Bay and you get the opportunity to sort of see it forward. It's not tanking. Like, I mean that in a very real sense, but you do have to be somewhat realistic about what your opportunities are in the league. And
we often talk about it as general managers. You have this discussion, and the JT O'Sullivans of the world, yes, you need those guys around you. How many teams was JT around? I read the other day.
He played for a lot of teams.
10, 11, or 12.
Well, that's the whole thing with his, when he did the QB school, it's like he's played for so many different coordinators that he's got a real good grasp on what they're all looking for. But yeah, you need those guys. I mean, Jacoby Brissett's going to make him. Jacoby Brissett might make $100 million in this league.
But as a general manager, you're saying, okay, let's get someone in here that we know is going to be there as a security guy. If he gets beaten out by Trask or a younger guy that we had an opportunity, great. If not, we have it's arguable, solid, good quarterback to help us win games and give us an opportunity to be above 500, which is important. The other thing I'm going to say is you have an ownership group there, the Glazers, who they can only thank God that they had a guy like Jason Light to help them. Even though Jason had his ups and downs, he and I have talked about that all the time. We've both felt the hot seat. When he was drafting the kickers and the punt, whatever, he comes back with a vengeance, and he makes one of the ballsiest moves by bringing a head coach and a quarterback that a lot of people wouldn't have made that move on, right? And here's where I'm going with it. They have an ownership group right now that own in the Premier League, and their world is turned upside down. You want to talk about a guy who has helped them settle their world in the U.S. to counteract what they're dealing with in Europe. You're looking at. I mean, Tom Brady has the most career playoff victories by a Tampa Bay quarterback in the history of the franchise. Right.
That's what you're talking. You're looking at. Like I said, Andy Reid's the first ever coach in Chiefs history to win back-to-back AFC West. Jason Light, and they didn't even have the same coach for both of them. But the Bucs have never won their division back-to-back years until this year. The Rams had gone all the way back in the 70s. The Rams moved cities twice between the time that they went back-to-back in their own division. It's longevity in the NFL is transient. That's actually a contradiction in terms, but success in the NFL is transient, just as being bad is transient. You think about, and we talk again about Chicago, everybody's so worried about, kind of, the years where you're not very good, but there's a lot of optimism now about the Bears. There's a lot of optimism about Detroit. Detroit's the favorite now in that division. And you think about Brad Holmes. We haven't even talked about Brad Holmes. Making great moves. He got Cam Sutton 3 for 33. Again, a former third-round pick. Last year, he allowed less than 51% completion percentage. Broke up 8 passes, intercepted 3. A really good, corner from the Steelers. A guy that, a very good value signing. They get David Montgomery. They move on from Jamal Williams. I actually think, a lot of people are like, oh, that's a crappy move. But to me, that's a Belichickian move. A guy scores, 17 touchdowns for you, and you're like, yeah, but come on. Touchdowns for running back are really, really weird. They go get Montgomery. They get Emmanuel Mosley, a guy who's played in the league, played in Super Bowls before for the Niners. You scaffold all that around an offensive line that's amazing, around, a wide receiver core that now you're looking, Amon-Ra St. Brown, one of the best in football. Jameson Williams, a top 12 pick. You trade TJ Hawkinson within division last year.
That was a big one for me.
Then they just basically almost went out after that, right? And so there's a lot of just, gutsy moves by Brad Holmes that I think a lot of people wouldn't have done. Trading with the Vikings to get Jameson Williams, trading with the Vikings to get rid of Hawkinson.
I want everyone to know that is a big, big deal.
You would never traded with Mickey.
It is heresy. Yeah. I love Mickey, and yet we were really competitive. That was the last thing in the world that mainly Tampa. I wouldn't have traded with Jason. Yeah. He and I would look across the sidelines at the end of games as we were down there in the last 6 minutes, and we'd be like, and it was interesting. But let's raise the roof here a little bit for my guy John Kaminsky. Yeah, you didn't even mention Kaminsky. Yeah. I mean, he was our guy here. We drafted him right in the 4th round. Gets cut, goes to Detroit. They just signed him. Played a really good season again. Yep. Dan gets the most out of guys like this. This guy is through and through. Tough ass, Barberton, Ohio. By the way, my hometown.
Okay. Was that part of the decision initially or no?
When we drafted him?
Yeah.
He was. If you know Barberton, Ohio, or Rubber Factory, Ohio, I never really lived there. My dad was from there. We moved up Miami, Ohio, because he was a coach at Miami of Ohio. But our roots were there, and we saw a guy like this. We know what he was about. Just like you, when you go out to the Midwest or where you're from, you look at someone, you're like, I know this person through and through.
I was at the combine the whole time. I'm like, Mark Richards, Chiefs Analytics. He's from Minnesota. I was like,
that's right.
They're just like Matt Polensky from the Niners, also a Minnesota kid. Like you look around and you're like, you identify similarly, right?
Well, look, you can look there and you say Chris Spielman, who's involved there, and he was a Massillon guy just down the street from Barberton, Ohio. Yeah. Those guys, they appreciate when they have a hard-nosed Midwestern, if you're calling Ohio Midwestern, sort of factory type guy. My point on it is Brad Holmes and where Dan is, they're pulling together the guys that are going to put their butts on the line.
And Dan, by the way, you look at, let's give him his flowers a little bit. He was, second in the NFL in terms of adding win probability within game decisions. Everybody thinks he's this goon, right? He's a guy that motivates his players. You watch Hard Knocks, and he was very compelling there as a motivator, but he's going for the right 4th downs. He's trusting his players. He's not, blowing timeouts. He's doing the right thing. And obviously that's not him doing the math. That's him trusting somebody that they've done the math. And you look at his coordinators, that's a guy in Aaron Glenn he trusts. And, they fired Aubrey Pleasant, the defensive backs coach. Yeah. They only lose 2 games the rest of the year after that, making even smart decisions along the coaching staff. And then Ben Johnson, you could make, and they don't make these official, but they gave him a raise. He might make more than Campbell, but he's a brilliant offensive mind. You want to keep him in the building, and obviously he did really good job with Goff. And you again, you think about building that culture up. 13-1 in 2021. 8-9, a winning record for the Detroit Lions last year. And I think that now you look at Sutton, a really, modest deal. As you said, Kaminsky, modest deal. Yep. Emmanuel Mosley, basically a veteran, not a minimum deal, but a modest deal. And now you come into the draft and they have pick 16, they have pick 18. They're gearing up. This is a team favorite in the NFC North now. A really, really solid group. And it's fun to watch them because, there are guys in that building that have been there for a while who have, from an analytics standpoint, John Dykema, Ko, Bringhedi, and folks like that have done really good work. And it's finally cool to see that sort of bubble to the surface for them with success.
Well, look, this is a perfect example of what I do strongly believe categorically in this league. You let the football people do their stuff, right?
Yeah.
You have two football guys there through and through, a head coach and a general manager. When you hire them, you let them do their stuff. So even though Chris Spielman is in the building there, he backs away. He might have some good opinions, of course. I mean, their cap guy, their president,
Mike Disner.
Disner, I'm talking about Disner. Of course, Disner needs to step back and understand that he's got some really good football people there and let them do their work. He and the president there, Rod Wood, they should do their business, right? And know that they're helping in any way they can by the contractual side. But I would say this for anyone, and Disner's a perfect example. Let them do their world, their business. It's going to help, and it's going to benefit you in the long run.
Yeah. And those are guys that have been through multiple regimes too. So, right. And that's the thing where people can get territorial when a new GM comes in. They can get territorial when a new head coach comes in. And, it's good to see, again, guys, being able to make their own fingerprints on this team and win with it, because it is such a, they've been down so much. And you think about back in the old days when Wayne Fontes was coaching the team in the Pontiac Silverdome, and you want to see that. They haven't hosted a playoff game. The last playoff game the Lions have hosted was Brett Favre's first playoff start.
Yep.
You think about that, like this city deserves, you think about like the romantic part of this game. This city deserves a playoff game. And we root for people here. We don't root for teams necessarily, but it is fun to see the people in that building have some success last year. Let's talk about some of the players that are still available in free agency. Hopefully we don't miss any news here, but there are some players who are still pretty high profile that have not been signed. One of them I think is interesting because this player got the franchise tag last year from Dallas, and he declined. He was my old company PFF. We assigned him about 0.45 wins above replacement. He declined by 50%, 0.3 the next year. Dalton Schultz. I think the tight end is always a enticing position to franchise tag because the tag's cheap.
Yeah.
But if the guy's not a superstar, you end up in this realm again, right? Like, and can you give me like a little bit of idea here? Because you guys had obviously with Tony, a Hall of Fame player, and then after that you had a bunch of useful guys. Levine Toilolo, Austin Hooper, even Hayden Hurst, who I know signed a contract today with Carolina, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
But like none of those guys are franchise tag players. And I feel like the franchise tag, because it's so different based upon different positions, you get things like this where Schultz is on the franchise tag. You have big expectations. He declines. And now he's sitting here a couple days into free agency. Part of it is the fact that, as you said, the draft is full of good tight ends. But part of it is the fact that the shine is worn off a little bit.
Shine's worn off a little bit. And you watch him. I happen to be trying to really dig in on him and see how he was truly moving around at this point and what he was compared to Evan Ingram as far as athletic movement. He's a big guy. He's just shy of 6'6", right?
Yep.
But yeah, I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, unfortunately as well, there are a good deal of tight ends out there that aren't bangers as blockers, right? To get that blocker and to get the route runner, it's rare. Those guys are the Hall of Famers, or those guys are the guys that you're talking about. The guys that are getting by and they're 4s and 5s, 4 being average in our scale and 5 being okay as a blocker, and they're running routes, good, not great.
Yeah.
Their run after the catches, solid. I mean, there's a lot of solidness to him, of course, but where he is right now will be really interesting to see where he goes. Will he end up? Where will he end up?
I mean,
Dallas
doesn't have a ton of room, and that really, I think, hurts him. They just had to get rid of Zeke, so maybe they give him an offer. But I think also, again, you think about they moved on from Kellen Moore. Does Mike McCarthy really want? When Mike McCarthy was the head coach, with Green Bay, they had Jermichael Finley, who was kind of a flop. They had Bubba Franks at the beginning, Donald Lee. Like it wasn't. They never really ran the offense through a tight end, and I think that. That might be working against him, whereas Kellen Moore might have preferred him a little bit more. Here's a player that I think is very intriguing. It's Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, right? He's a former rival of yours with the Saints. I think he was one of the league leaders in interceptions this year. Was traded, sort of in that August, time period. Howie Roseman's always sort of buying low on players, that kind of thing. He did break an arm during the season, but he did come back for the playoffs. He's a guy who played slot corner for New Orleans, and then he played safety for Philadelphia. So he has that kind of Tyrann Mathieu-like versatility. I don't think he's going to stay on the market for very long. But there is this weird thing about those kind of players in the market is they don't get paid very much.
They don't get paid very much, and I can't comment a whole bunch on him. I don't have a ton to say about him. I 100% agree with what you're saying, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. That's one that's interesting. I just think I think he's going to be a very good player for whoever signs him. I just think he might be disappointed with the market he ends up with, just because that position. I mean, you think about like, when you were in Atlanta, it's like Brian Poole was a pretty good player for you for a number of years, but he never really sniffed good money because it's just a position the league doesn't value. I mean, the real weird part is that most of the time a slot corner is a failed outside corner,
many times he is. You're exactly right.
And only from places like Alabama or somebody like that do you end up getting a guy who was trained at that position. And it has to be those big schools, because if you're a slot corner and you're playing for UTSA, you're not very good, because if you were good, you'd be playing outside.
And yet there's a role there, of course, and you can do really well for your team. Those years that we were with New England, I mean, we were very, very particular about having someone in that role who was really, really smart. Of course, they had good, solid inside ability, agility, and awareness was a really big thing with Chauncey Gardner. That is what he is.
Yeah.
But I just don't. I mean, I don't have a feel of where he's going to go.
But to your point, you guys used Troy Brown in that spot to sort of like, if you can coach a wide receiver to play that position above replacement player, then how valuable is it? Is maybe the question. And I think for Gardner Johnson, maybe that's the worry. And maybe that's why he wanted to go to Philly, so he could play a more traditional safety role, so that, folks would think that he was more valuable than if he just played in the slot. One of the last guys I want to talk about before we wrap up is Orlando Brown. There was reports that he was going to go to Chicago. I think that those have since abated. I want to make sure that we don't make fools of ourselves. He is unsigned currently. Orlando Brown's a weird one, right? Because you got one of the worst athleticism scores I've ever seen, right? He's not muscular, he's big, he's slow, he's not even that strong when you look at like bench press and stuff like that. He's a waist bender for the most part, not to get all look at me, a mathematician talking about waist bending. He's a waist bender. He's gotten worse from a wins above replacement every single year, right? Like, so in Ravens run first offense, he was worth a lot because he was a good run blocker, especially on the right side. He moves to the left side in Kansas City, and he got sort of less valuable year in and year out. He was the guy that gave up the pressure in Arden Key that ended up being the ankle injury to Mahomes. Last year he was on the franchise tag at $16 million. The Chiefs offered him a reasonable deal. He did not have an agent who had ever been a football agent before, so they flubbed that. Chiefs move on. They go with Jawan Taylor, at least for now. Orlando Brown remains a free agent. What do you think happens here? Because I think he's going to have to eat some humble pie possibly and take a deal that's a little bit less than what Kansas City was offering him even last year.
I think he's going to have to eat humble pie. We made some of those mistakes where there were some of those guys out there that we projected, and they're not around all the time. Again, he has his limitations, no question about it. How many games has he started in total, though?
Yeah, he's played every game. I mean, he plays all the time.
So he plays all the time, and you have an experienced guy out there. Look, I don't know how many times it frustrated me in those early years when we were playing with a right and a left tackle who were not big athletes. They were upright, erect players, so they were getting their asses knocked back into Matt Ryan, and I'm pulling my hair out.
Yeah.
And then we would sign them year in, year out for the next 2 or 3 years. So,
And why is that? Is just the coach prefers the known bad?
Yes, okay. Exactly. It's a really good point. Now, the guys that were doing that for us weren't jackasses at all. They were hard-nosed guys, and they had limitations, but we would rather go with that, that direction. If you get a guy who's a goofy guy and a guy who's not a real team guy, he's not working hard, and he's a pain in the butt for the coaches and ultimately for the organization, well, then, you're short-lived.
Yeah. And I think Orlando Brown is, he's kind of, I think, people will look at when he negotiated his deal with Kansas City and think, oh, this is kind of a clown. But for the most part, you look, he's the best friend of the quarterback. He's, a really, he plays every play, as you said, he plays pretty hard, all those kinds of things. And so there's elements to him. Like even he signed the franchise tag. The franchise tag is the one place where you're allowed to sort of sit out now, because guys can't hold out anymore when they are under contract. The fines are enormous, and Orlando sat out for like 3-4 days. He basically sat out enough time to say, I'm not happy, but he didn't sit out. He didn't screw the Chiefs over last year when they put him on the franchise tag. So there's aspects to him that are positive, but there's also the fact that he's not in good shape. Mm-hmm. There's also the fact that he's not a great whistle to whistle guy, and so I think that Chiefs fan, there's Chiefs fans in the comment section that are like, we're glad that he's gone. Which that happens. The Chiefs did win a Super Bowl with him, playing left tackle. So flags do fly forever there. But that's one where I think it'll be a little bit interesting to see, what happens here. So we're coming up on 5 o'clock. We have about 10 minutes left, Thomas. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at these teams and I'm thinking, okay, which team? Let's answer a couple questions each person. Okay. So which team is the team that has made you think the most so far? And which team do you think is going to make you think the most moving forward?
You're talking about in the moves?
In the free agency trades, let's throw Chicago and Carolina out of it, because those are the easy answers. But let's think about the teams that have made you think the most going in, and the team that maybe is held back a little that'll make you think the most going forward.
And by the way, are we going to answer some of the questions in here as well, or no?
We certainly can. We mostly just had our fans in here just talking to each other, which has been really fun.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Yeah. All right. So your question is thinking the most as far as
which team has piqued your interest the most?
I would probably I'm really curious on how the Raiders are going to navigate through what they're doing, to be honest with you. That's big for me. Knowing Josh, knowing what they've done with, how they're going to operate with a quarterback that I think has some middle of the line,
injury issues with him too.
Injury issues, yeah. And I just think those two guys, general manager and head coach, have really good football minds about them, and they have vision. But they also, they're in a situation where they have an owner who's got expectations, and I just don't know going into this season how much patience is going to be there. And maybe that was all driven by the media and the fan base. Was there really, you're such a fan of this game, was there a lot of banter out there? Were there comments out there from
when I was when I was at PFF last year? I was tasked with making a lot more predictions. I was betting. I was doing this, and Raiders fans were very adamant that they were supposed to win last year. And I always came back and said, look, you're 6-1 to win your own division. You do all these moves, and Derek Carr is not. I'm not a huge fan of Derek Carr. I've watched him forever. And Raiders fans like, no, this is our year. This is our year. This is our year. And they were competitive last year. They took the Chiefs down to the wire in Arrowhead. They lost a lot of one-score games. I don't think they were as bad as the record indicated. But last year was very much we're going to push a lot of the chips in the middle of the table. And I think this year it doesn't strike me as that way. I think they're a little bit more measured. But they were very much supposed to win last year. And I think it smarted a little bit. And I think that they were very smart in terms of the contract they gave Derek Carr was a 1 year with an out. Yep. And Derek Carr, who was, in my opinion, for him, very, very good in 2021. And he had done some good things with John Gruden before John Gruden was fired that I thought it almost entirely regressed. And to your point about Josh McDaniel, Josh McDaniel got very good seasons out of Kyle Orton. He's got very good seasons out of Tom Brady, of course, Matt Castle, as you know, that was your first year with the Falcons, but you probably saw how good he was with the Patriots when Brady got injured. The fact that Carr couldn't mesh with him was a tell to me. And so once that happened, the Christmas Day game where he couldn't throw the ball in the ocean against the Steelers, you knew it was over. and they were going to move on. Now, I'm surprised that it's Garoppolo, but I'm intrigued because obviously when a guy's worked with every quarterback that he's ever had except for one, you'd sort of assume that Jimmy G's going to fall in that other bucket, the bucket with the Bradys and all those. But it'll be interesting to see that.
So we didn't even talk about some of these other teams very quickly, like the Chargers. We really didn't talk a whole bunch about.
The Chargers just kind of kicked the can down the road again, right? Like they basically, and this is where it gets tough, right? And this is where I talk about, restructures and why, you go to SumerSports.com and read our article about restructures. But like they basically restructured Mike Williams, they restructured Keenan Allen, they restructured, they got Eric Kendricks, who in my opinion is like the quintessential Los Angeles Chargers linebacker. But there's a lot of cap charges for next year. And next year is when you're going to have to start paying Justin Herbert. Not a lot, but he's going to get his contract now. And you think about that signing bonus, that's going to prorate, into the following years. So I'm interested to see. Kellen Moore, to me, though, is a really, really good acquisition for them. Kellen Moore is a fabulous offensive coordinator. And I think, all this stuff that's held Justin Herbert back the last 3 years, I think if Kellen Moore can't solve it, I think you're going to have to look at Justin Herbert a little bit more critically this next year.
I want to fold into, let's stay out west a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Denver for a minute because we really haven't, I don't think we've talked.
No, not really. And they made moves.
They made moves. Like the O-line move elements for them is important.
Yep.
You have Sean Payton coming in there with a really strong opinion about how he wants to put things together. You know my feelings about George Payton. I really like George as a general manager. It's unfortunate so many people are taking their shots, and I feel for him because every once in a while I know.
You would do the same thing, right? Yeah. Like if you were him, it's the same thing with Joe Douglas. If exactly. Rodgers goes there and doesn't work, you're not going to like what we all thought that Russell Wilson was a Hall of Famer at this time last year. We all did. Like, and so but like you look at their signings, right? Like to me, they're all signings to buffer the risk. Michael Burton's a fullback. You take them from the Chiefs. He's a good fullback. Samaje Perine's a good backup running back. A guy you think about last year, they go Javonte Williams into Melvin Gordon. Why did they cut Melvin Gordon? Because he could not hang on to the ball. That guy fumbled the ball at historic rates. Jarrett Stidham. Why is Jarrett Stidham there? Because Russell Wilson was banged up a lot last year. You need a quarterback to at least get you on the green. If you're there, Chris Manners, a good backup tight end. Like Mike McGlinchey's a good right tackle. Zach Allen, as you talked about when we talked about the interior defensive lineman before that Monday night game, a pretty good underrated player. None of those guys are difference makers. None of those guys are going to move the Vegas win total on the betting markets, but they're all going to keep shit from hitting the fan all that vigorously, right? Like that's and we talked about this yesterday. Like the sad truth of these days, as cool as they are and as fun as we've had for 2 hours talking about this, not a lot of difference makers change teams in free agency. But it's about buffering the risk around your roster. And I think Denver did that. We don't gamble anymore, as a part of Sumer, but that'd be a team I would bet to make the playoffs. Like if I were still gambling, I would bet the Broncos because I think Sean Payton got a 9-8 season out of Taysom Hill, Jameis Winston, and Trevor Siemian. He's going to be able to get Russell Wilson back to somewhat competent football play. And, the rest of the roster, Jerry Jeudy's a wonderful player. It sounds like he's on the block, but Sutton's great. The Albert Abuakuam, can they unlock him a little bit? Another young tight end who struggled. And then the whole defense is very good.
You got to bank on Sean Payton. And as much as the Atlanta Falcon faithful will be agitated, not only that I took Alvin Kamara as my first ever fantasy player, but that I laud Sean for being one of those coaches of less than a handful in the league, I believe, that you would trade picks away to bring into your organization. I think he's going to do really good things for them as long as there's an open mind. And of course, this is a big thing for Russell and how Russell kind of comes out of where he was, Russell Wilson. Of course, I think that's a big thing. But I look like you, I think I'm banking on them to turn it around and work together. You have a head coach and a general manager that will be able to work together well. Yeah. And this is an interesting thing. I want to stop this, but George Payton was one of the most respected talent evaluators. He did great work for Minnesota, and Rick Spielman helped him get to a lot of places.
They broke the bank to keep him for all those years.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. I mean, and so what it reveals to most people is it's a completely different story when you get into the GM role. There's a lot on your plate, and it's not all about your evaluation prowess. It's about your decision making. Of course, it's about how you operate. And you have a lot of things that could be on you. You could have an ownership situation. You could have. I mean, it is a complicated, very, very multi-layered job to be in as a general manager. And again, I'm banking on George to pull it through.
Yeah, it's not easy, and you know, the quarterback decision is one that a lot of us would have made. And you know, I think the head coaching one was tricky. But there was a lot in Nathaniel Hackett's history to suggest that he would have been a good coach. Like it's one of those again where like, was there anything glaring in Nathaniel Hackett's history to say this guy's an idiot or this guy's bad? No. And in fact, he's probably not an idiot. It's just these things sometimes are not matches for people. You think of like Wade Phillips, a former Denver Broncos head coach who has always just been better as a coordinator, and that's sometimes okay. And I think you miss on head coach, you miss on quarterback in year one, and all of a sudden everybody thinks you're an idiot. Where you look back at Minnesota and you're like, well, they drafted Harrison Smith. That's a Hall of Famer. Cordero Patterson, might be a Hall of Fame return man. I don't remember if he was there for Jefferson, but like Jefferson's probably going to make. You look at the history of him and Spielman. They drafted really well, right? Yeah. And that just doesn't go away. I think like when you get in that GM chair. So. Okay, we have 2 minutes left. Let's have some parting thoughts. I'll just say I'll answer the question. I think a little bit for me. I'm really, really intrigued by what the Eagles do now. They have a lot of players. They lost Javon Hargrave. They just cut Darius Slay to save some. They got Rashad Penny, who I think will be really good in that offense. With that offensive line, they did retain Jason Kelce, but they still have a lot of questions to answer. And obviously for the team, there's always a Super Bowl hangover in many cases. The Chiefs and Bengals have thwarted that off the last 2 years. But there is a hangover oftentimes for the team that loses the Super Bowl. So I do wonder how Howie is going to rally the troops this year and win the elusive NFC East division that hardly anybody wins back-to-back. So that's the one for me. I really enjoyed these 2 hours of just like sort of hanging out with you and talking ball. You steering me towards semantic responsibility is, of course, always, as you've mentored me so well. I think this has been really fun, and I really appreciate everybody for coming by. If you're still here, hit the like button, subscribe, rate, and review to basically on every single platform for us. Follow us on Twitter at SumerSports on Twitter, and hit up our website SumerSports. I know our colleague Paul Saban is going to have an article published there within the next 24 hours. Really excited for that one on Justin Fields. So this has been a good time. Thomas, do you have any parting thoughts?
No, only parting thought is we are going to Umi and have some sushi tonight right down the street here, one of my favorite restaurants. So love being here with everyone. It was really fun. Hope to have many more pods out of this studio area.
Yeah, I thought this was a great time. So, for Thomas Dimitroff, this has been Eric Eager. This has been the SumerSports Free Agency Show.